Hello everyone, welcome to the session. A company emits greenhouse gases, but not all emissions are the same. And not all are caused in the same way. Some emissions happen inside your factory or offices, while some happen because you consume electricity or energy generated elsewhere. And many emissions occur far beyond your organizational boundaries, across the suppliers, logistics providers, and even customers. If we do not classify emissions carefully, the same emissions get counted multiple times or missed entirely. To avoid confusion and double counting, greenhouse gas emissions are classified into three scopes: Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. Let's understand this using a simple but realistic example. Consider Greenbite Foods Private Limited, a mid-sized food processing company. Greenbite operates one manufacturing facility, uses electricity from the grid, purchases packaging material, runs a small fleet of delivery vehicles, and sells packaged food products across India. We will use Greenbite as a reference to understand how emissions are classified and reported. Scope 1 emissions are direct greenhouse gas emissions from the sources that the organization owns and controls. For Greenbite, Scope 1 emissions include diesel burned in the backup generators, natural gas used in the boilers for food processing, fuel consumed by the company-owned delivery trucks, and refrigerant leakage from the cold storage and cooling systems. These emissions occur on site or from the assets that Greenbite directly operates. Let's take a simple numerical example. Suppose Greenbite consumes 20,000 liters of diesel annually in generators and vehicles. If diesel emission factor is 2.68 kg CO2 equivalent per liter, then the total GHG emissions would amount to 53.6 tons CO2 equivalent reported under Scope 1. A useful way to remember Scope 1 is that if your organization burns the fuel, operates the equipment, or owns the asset, the emissions are Scope 1. Scope 2 emissions are indirect emissions associated with purchased energy. Greenbite does not burn coal or gas to generate electricity. However, it consumes electricity produced by the power plants. Those power plants emit greenhouse gases because Greenbite and other users demand electricity. Therefore, the emissions from electricity generation are attributed to Greenbite as Scope 2 emissions. Scope 2 includes purchased electricity, steam, heating, or cooling. For example, if Greenbite consumes 10,000 kilowatt hours of electricity in a year and the grid emission factor is 0.5 kg CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour, then the total GHG under Scope 2 would amount to 5 tons of CO2 equivalent. A simple rule applies here. If your organization pays the energy bill, the associate emissions fall under Scope 2. Scope 3 emissions are all other indirect emissions that occur across the value chain, from activities that the organization does not own or control, but that are linked to its operations. For Greenbite, Scope 3 emissions include emissions from producing raw materials, packaging, third-party transportation, employee commuting, waste treatment, customer use of products, and disposal of packaging. Most organizations find Scope 3 accounts for the highest share of their total emissions, often 90%. These emissions are harder to measure, but they reflect the full climate impact of business decisions. A key point to remember in this: you may not control Scope 3 sources directly, but your procurement, your design, logistics, and sales decisions strongly influence them. To make Scope 3 manageable, emissions are further classified into 15 standardized categories covering upstream and downstream activities. For Greenbite, purchased packaging materials fall under Category 1, purchased goods and services. Third-party transportation falls under Category 4, upstream transportation and distribution. Disposal of packaging by consumers fall under Category 12, end-of-life treatment of sold products. This structure helps organizations identify material emission hotspots and focus efforts where impact is the highest. Organizational GHG inventory structure. When building a greenhouse gas inventory, emissions are organized systematically. First, the organization and its boundaries are defined. Next, the emission sources are identified and classified into Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. Finally, emissions are quantified using consistent methodologies and reported year after year. This structure ensures accuracy, avoids double counting, and supports credible decision making? Before we move on, consider this quick check. If Greenbyte hires a third-party logistics company to deliver products using vehicles they do not own, those emissions are classified as Scope 3. Understanding emission scope is the foundation of accurate greenhouse gas accounting. Once scope are clear, the organization can move from measurement to strategy. Thank you for watching. In the next session, for more such updates from ReGeneva.